Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
All right, hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Jason Paul with me here today. Jason is the president and founder of Lifecore Group and is a leading consumer-centric healthcare innovator. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Hey, good morning, Tim. Thanks for asking me to be a part of it.
All right, thank you. Can you give me sort of a snapshot of your career and where you're at right now?
Sure. Well, it all started back in 1997, and I can't even believe I'm saying 1997, and it's now 2025, right? But no, interesting enough, I fell into my career, right? Here it is 27 years later. And so falling into it, and basically what I mean by my career is that I was a benefits consultant for companies, right? We went in and we organized, put together insurance plans, benefit programs, all that kind of stuff, either from scratch or, existing Blue Cross Blue Shield plans or whatever it is. But it didn't take very long, and I looked at things differently, right? Because again, I was a very young guy, still am, right? I think, I'm not sure, but maybe. And I looked at things a lot differently, and I was like, well, a lot of things that we started seeing back then were things that related to lifestyles, right? How we lived and what we did. And what was interesting as I was discovering that, pause and go back further, even into my own childhood, right? Growing up in North Dakota, being a family farm kid and all that stuff. I mean, obviously we grew up in hard work. We did everything that we needed to do, whatever it took. And my mom, unfortunately, was born with a health condition, right? So, which generally would be cured by, different supplements and things of that nature. But unfortunately, due to some doctor's mistakes, it rendered her worse over time. And eventually she lost her kidneys at 25 years old.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I was 3 at the time. And so I grew up with a lot of doctors, hospitals, and clinics, various different things. I see my mom making every effort she could, given her abilities to stay well, right? And those kind of things. So even so far as, because we lived out in the country, my dad worked construction and farmed. We actually built an extension under our house and built a pool in the bottom section because it's North Dakota, right? And so you had to fulfill it for the winter time. So we built it into the house, if you will, and she could swim year round to make sure she was physically getting that activity, given her rickets still existed because it never got corrected because of the deficiencies of things. And so I grew up with that. And then, of course, at the same time, I was 10, and my father, unfortunately, blew out his back. L4 and L5 ruptured it. And interesting enough, surgery right away, they nicked a nerve, they made it worse, and it was kind of just downhill from there. So here it is, I have 2 parents, both of them who basically are essentially disabled, right, of some things. And so I had to step up and do more, but more so it was showing me a side of things that not a lot of people get to see. And of course, we never wish upon anybody to see those things. I started to see, the emotional, the physical, the financial aspects of how those health challenges affected them, right? It affected our overall lives.
Yes.
And so, I came in, and of course I fall into this career of insurance benefits, right? In various different things. And so as I was quickly, involved in it, I started to see things differently because I'm like, well, why would these people who we can see these claims have these claims when we know that they're preventable? Right. I mean, my folks, my mom, born with conditions compounded by mistakes of others. Right. Nothing she could have done differently. My father, unfortunately, probably maybe through some better education and better understanding, could have maybe prevented that back injury because of things, but he didn't. Right. And then, of course, there's myself, who was this young man who said, okay, I don't want to end up like either one of them, respectfully, right, of some stuff. And plus, my dad had heart conditions and all kinds of stuff because of, again, that Midwest general dietary aspect of lots of red meat and, all of those type of things. And so I looked at this and, well, why would people do this to themselves? I mean, I know what the pain and suffering is. So that's where everything started to begin. And that was probably about 1999. Right. And so in early 2000s is when Lifecore was started. And I stopped working for a brokerage firm, started my own insurance brokerage firm, and then also started Lifecore and said, okay, what's the challenge here? What's the thing that's not being figured out? Because the idea of wellness and being healthy is sure as heck not a concept I just figured out. I mean, go back to Jack LaLanne, right? Jane Fonda. I mean, we can go back to decades of people talking about being healthy and being well. So what was the problem? And I realized the one problem was application, right? We simply weren't applying our knowledge in the various different things to obviously change the outcomes, or at least we weren't doing it, if anything, consistently enough.
Okay.
So as we looked at that, my career started to evolve into not just implementing insurance programs and designing them, but said, well, how do we create a wellness concept and idea to where we can get people to, again, mitigate risk, right, and be healthier? And so we developed our program, and we used a model called loss aversion. And it's, you probably, your background, you understand, we all understand loss and the aversion of it. But what we did is we actually built a system that was based on effort, because in the world of health, you and I can do the exact same thing and we'll probably get different outcomes, right? Not because you tried harder or less, but it's just that we're different people, right? Of some things. So therefore, you can't really judge a person based on outcomes. That's part of the metrics, right, of some things. But what you're really looking at is how do you judge the person on the effort being made? Because as long as you and I put forth the effort, the outcomes are what they are, but we both put forth the effort. And so that evolved us to a program that led us to getting engagement levels that generally most wellness gets 15% engagement. Our programs are getting 80 to 85% engagement.
Wow.
Year after year, month after month. Right.
Can I pause there for a second?
Yeah, please.
Because
I get on a tangent. I love this stuff. I mean, I'm like the nerd of healthcare, so.
Right. Well, that's some very, very impressive numbers, right? Because as a lot of people know, people know how to be rich and have six-pack abs. It's not a mystery, right? But getting people motivated to put forth the effort and all that is incredibly challenging, right? There was a UCLA study that showed that the problem is most of us see our future self as a stranger, right? If you said, oh, do you want this or this right now? Oh yeah, I'll take this right now. But do you want to put in the work for this later? Like, why? For who? It's intangible in some sense. So that's incredibly impressive numbers, 15 to 85%, you said?
Generally, general wellness gets 15% engagement. We were getting 80 to 85%. It doesn't matter the size of the group, what the group was, anything. It was always that same thing. And basically it worked out because, again, the secret sauce really was nothing more than creating some kind of motivational factor greater than the idea, to your point, of
loss aversion,
me being healthy, staying healthy, or essentially avoiding or reducing my risk, right? Because the idea is I'm healthy now. Well, yeah, most people are healthy until they're sick. Right. Unless you're like my mother, who was born with the condition, right? In that case. So you look at that and say, am I going to go through my life hoping that just stuff works out? Or am I going to make an effort to influence those things? Because at the end of the day, the word prevention has been, obviously prevention and wellness. Those are words that have been really diluted, stretched, all kinds of things. And I really say to myself, do we really prevent? And of course, people have arguments against it one way or the other, but I would say this, I like to use the word influence. Okay. Right? I like to say, can I influence my outcomes? At the end of the day, I mean, and again, I'll use my wife as the example, jumping ahead a little bit. It was 2020 and we lived obviously a very healthy lifestyle. My wife exercised with me. We ate 80-20 rule. 80% of the time we ate well, right? Did all things, exercise 6 days a week, rode bike, did all kinds of the typical things that we're supposed to do, right? To be super healthy.
Right.
And all of a sudden, something wasn't right with my wife. We were kind of trying to dive into it. And it was August 27th, 2020. And of course, my wife suffered a seizure out of the blue. And within 24 hours, we were told that she had a brain tumor. And a month later, once the biopsy happened, we were told it was cancer, right?
Wow.
So I look at those things and I say to myself, okay, well, and technically from on paper standpoint, my wife should not have cancer.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, you can't prevent it, but you can reduce the chances of it.
Well, and here's the thing, and I also look, and here's also the flip side of the arguments of why do we get engaged and involved in our health. And I will say this, her standard of care, of course, she had surgery that removed about 75% of the tumor. And then therefore the rest was 33 rounds of proton radiation. And it was 6 rounds of chemotherapy was the protocol. She did all the proton radiation. She did 5 of the 6 rounds of chemotherapy. Most people can't get past 2 rounds. Right? She did 5, and she could have done 6, but we actually made a collective decision to say, is that really going to be worth it from a standpoint of, because obviously as much as chemo is helping the situation, it's hurting things. Exactly. And so, and Tim, I will tell you this, I am 110% convinced that the reason my wife did so well and is doing so well, considering there's obviously things that'll never be the same or back to that normal prior to, but the reality is the reason she is that way is because she had what I call health equity.
Yep.
Right? She was in great shape. She took care of herself. In fact, that even goes into myself just the same as a caretaker, right? Mentally, we were strong. Physically, we were strong. And because of that, we were able to withstand and get through something that, I hate to say it, but most people would not get through, right? And the statistics are there to show that.
Yep.
So that's where, so you talk about those things and why. So it's creating those environments to where, okay, how do we create environments of motivation and engagement without necessarily that pain and suffering, right? And let people understand why we want to be doing those things. So I think it's a combination of all that stuff that gets to the point to where, helping people figure that out. And for some people, it's the financials, right? It's that they say they value their wallet more than they value their health. That's okay. So then let's build that model to where they'll become engaged in their health because they need to, right? From a financial perspective, right? Of some things, because there's a financial component to it. And then at some point, once they're doing it, and this is what we've seen with our models, after about a year, of course, we were seeing the metrics across the board improve by 5 to 15% across the board. It didn't matter what metric we were measuring. Weight, insulin, triglycerides, cholesterol, all the typical basic markers, right, that we did back then. That was 20 some years ago, right, of some stuff. And so because we've seen that, what happened is after that first year, that need turned into the want. I want to be doing these things, right?
Okay.
That want turns into, well, I want to, but I also now need to, because so it's that shifting of that mindset of those things. And that really became the focus of these kind of things, was how do we really get people to, if you will, act as if though they've been diagnosed with something horrible, which usually gets them to be motivated to do something. But in absence of that, how do we get them to act that same way without having to go through that pain and suffering? Knowing that at the end of the day, we've got to find some kind of lever that is going to trigger them to do something. So, and that became the premise of everything that we've built going forward throughout the different things that we've been doing.
Okay. Excellent. It sounds like it's been pretty effective.
Well, it has. And then, of course, this was early 2000s, and the mentality was decent. A lot of employers said, well, we don't want to do that loss aversion. We want to do wellness and do loss aversion. And so, interesting enough, we would do loss aversion, but same system, same advisor, same everything, right? We couldn't get better than 20% engagement. Right? So what was interesting is we kept doing it for years. And then, of course, now this is getting into 2008. Of course, we all know what happened in that era of things, and everything started changing. And of course, the ACA was on the docket, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, right, was on the docket. And I said, all right, things are about to start changing drastically and not in a good way. So the reality is at that point in time, we actually shifted gears with everything in our model. And I sold my insurance brokerage. We halted Lifecore as a corporate wellness company. And then we said, okay, where do we reposition and what do we need to do? Because it was that thought process at that time that says, I think things have got to change in the retail world, right? I was seeing things in retail world, meaning that the individuals that buy their insurance direct, right? Or eventually there'll be a shift in how we buy our benefits, because I just seen writing on the wall that didn't look good, right? Because employer-based benefits only came out because of 1942, right? It was the act that basically, whereas I think it was whoever the administration was at the time, froze wages, right? So basically, employers said, okay, well, I can't pay anybody more, so what else can we do? Oh, let's give them these benefits, right? So that's when basically employee benefits started, because you couldn't raise wages, so they gave benefits. Well, the reality is that that worked and made sense in 1942 and maybe a couple of decades after. But even back in 2008, this isn't 1942 anymore, right? And so much has started to change. Even then, we started seeing the evolving of the gig economy, right? Freelance workers, right? 1099s, all these different people. We've seen a lot more remote working starting to happen even pre-COVID. And COVID, of course, we know, really showed us what remote working looks like. But overall, these things were changing. So we halted, and we took about the next 5 years or so and started figuring out, how do we look at things differently? And that's when we got involved with what I would call true healthcare. And that was the naturopathic doctors, the acupuncturists, the massage therapists, the personal coaches, trainers, these type of people. And as we got to know them, we're hearing of stage 3, stage 4 cancers actually being abolished, right? And I'm like, how is this possible? I almost couldn't believe it, right? Because I was indoctrinated into growing up into this medical system, healthcare system, and then of course being into it with the insurance side of some things. Because obviously none of that, of course, we all know, is supported by the current models of some things. And I was hearing it directly from the person who was part of it to the person who was actually cured, right, of those things. And a lot of times they were seeking out these treatments or these things as a last-ditch effort, where the current model had said, I'm sorry, this is all we can do for you. It's, get your orders in a fair or whatever. Yeah.
Right. There's been a bit of a renaissance in the last 10 to 20 years in the healthcare industry. It's just America is unfortunately a very slow adoption healthcare system.
Well, in the honest truth, they have no reason to adopt or change as far as the system is concerned. I mean, the reality is they've created this big monstrous of a system, probably unintended consequences, right? In many ways, I like to hope and believe that we didn't purposely get ourselves into this position, right, of some things. But the reality is you've got so many layers that have been built on a model of reaction, of disease, of standard of care, of certain things that, and the reality is, what's our option, right? I mean, technically, only if you have the ambition, as well as maybe even a little bit of an extra bank account, to be able to say, I'm going to go out there and figure this out on my own.
Right.
Most people just succumb to what the system is because they can't afford time or money to be able to figure it out otherwise. And so you're left with a model that in theory doesn't have any motivation to change because it's working for that aspect of some things. I mean, it's lucrative. It is getting results. There's no doubt, right? We are living longer of some things, and there's no doubt there's a lot of positive things. But the reality is can things be better? Can they be different? And, and that's where we started realizing, but what I also realized with this group of people is that And of course, being from the Midwest, right, I describe them as fall leaves. They're scattered everywhere, right? And they have no idea how to really work together, right, of some things. They're all independently just out there hoofing it themselves. And unlike the medical world, which has networks, has integration, has referrals, has some organization from a business perspective to them, these alternative, or I'll call natural, or other healthcare modalities are just there floundering, right? And so that's where, again, wheels started turning with different things. And of course, we went down an avenue of designing what we were calling our Lifecore centers. And that was, again, putting these people in places that were organized, structured, beautiful, not, some warehouse down the street or where they could get cheap rent type of thing, and really creating professionalism of those things. And then our understanding is, hey, let's us come in there and let's bring in all of my experience, all of the things we've learned, and let's harness the customer experience, right? Let's create a cool model to where we can help people understand their insurance. Help them say, okay, it applies here or doesn't apply here. What's a health savings account? I don't know. What is that? Okay, well, let us tell you what that is. Let me tell you how that works. Right? And start really giving that consumer the guidance that they have never been given, right, of those things. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier to you, is that once we were embarking upon that, as we came to that's when, unfortunately, my wife got sick, and that was about 2020. And once she got sick, I immediately pulled the plug on the project because obviously at that time, brain cancer is a pretty big term. And she was going through that. Our boys were 3 and 4 years old. My grandma was sick. We had brought her down, as well as we were in the middle of building a house in which I decided to take the initiative of being the GC on the house because you're from the Midwest. That's what you do. You just do everything, right? Yeah. Things. And so the plate was extremely full. Well, exactly.
You mow your own grass and all that.
Yeah, and that's how we just like. It's just what you do. It's just how you're indoctrinated with some things. And so, bottom line is, I pulled that project, but it didn't take long after that, and that was the tipping point for everything. Was my wife's situation, because I knew how to navigate everything, right? I knew what to ask, how to ask, who to ask, all those things. And Tim, I got to tell you, it was one of the most frustrating things I had ever encountered in my entire career.
I bet.
And I thought to myself, how would the average person not only go through this, just get the diagnosis of that is crushing enough alone, let alone having to go and figure out all the other stuff that goes along with it. We had a doctor group deny or bill us part of the emergency process, right? Emergency room process, right? I won't go into the details, but part of the process. United Health, one of the big carriers, there you go, denied it, right? And they said it was out of network. They know better. Anything that's part of an emergency situation can never be billed out of network. It must be in network. Even if the doctors are out of network, they must be treated as in network. That's the rule. That's what it is. But guess what? They denied it, and they denied it. And it took us 8 months. Most people would have freaked out and paid the bill because it was almost $3,000, something like that.
Which is largely what they're counting on, right?
Exactly, right? Exactly. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of stories. That's a whole other episode of some things. But the reality is that we even got sent to collections by the doctor group. And I said, nope. But we communicated. We communicated with the doctor group. We communicated and said, listen, in fact, we even communicated with the collections company and said, listen, here's exactly what's going on. Here's exactly what's going to happen. And guess what happened? After 8 months or whatever it was, that insurance company at the time paid the bill in full because they knew they had messed with the wrong person who obviously knew this. But again, should that even be necessary?
No, of course not. Of course not. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack there, and I don't think. Yeah, to your point, we could spend episodes. We could spend a year talking about all the things wrong.
Exactly. So those things we parlayed into where we're kind of at today, right? And that is basically creating our Health Aviator program, which is the premise for everything that will be rolling out in the months and years ahead, right? Because we have to create a centralized component to where the customer can rest on. Right. And then from there, it's okay, what is it that I know? What is it that I don't know? right, from that standpoint, and start creating models using technologies, various different things, and centralizing it, and giving that consumer that ability to have an advocate, right? Even in health, you need an advocate just as much as you need one in sickness, right? To understand. And the reality is most of us are going to fly into or stay into or be into health. And at some point, we're going to migrate over to sickness because that's just part of life, with the hopes that we return back to health, some things. So there has to be that fluidity and that agnosticness to where, okay, what can help me make those changes and do that kind of stuff? And that's where, from her situation, we went from the bricks and mortar concept of that idea, which of course still the idea and still something I want to bring to life someday. But we said we need to do this digitally first to really help that customer, no matter where they are, digitally do that, hone that in, and then from there we can add on to it once we do those things. So that's kind of where we're at today, right? Is that a culmination of my personal life, my years in wellness, in corporate benefit stuff that has got us to the point of where we've realized that the system is way messier than it should be, way more complicated, and it's not getting any easier. And there's really no organizations that are stepping up. I'll put it this way, they're stepping up, but they're not having the full understanding. No fault of their own, but my perspectives, my understandings are rather unique. I'll put it that way.
I think you are uniquely situated to help people with such things. So that's great. It sounds like it's a perfect convergence of everything for this model.
When you start to look at your life and you start to say, what is it all about, right? For what reason? There's a reason for things, right? We may not understand it and figure it out until much later in our lives, but there's got to be a reason that, and how do we take something from that and find that silver lining? You know, to me, obviously my life has been encloaked in healthcare, right? So apparently that's been what my purpose is, and obviously my purpose will be, and I will do that for the next, I suppose, 25 years.
Okay.
God willing, of course.
Or more. So what, there's a whole bunch of there. Are you familiar with Dr. Peter Attia and his book Outlive? It's very popular over the past year.
I'm actually reading it right now.
Oh, okay. Okay. Excellent. So for our viewers and listeners, the premise is he was a cancer surgeon and basically left because he was fed up with, it's the old analogy of the physicians are too busy pulling people out, drowning out of the river to go upstream and figure out why they keep falling in. And that's kind of what he did. Is he went upstream and found out that so much of this is within our control, right? Wellness choices. There are a few things like Gary Brecka talks about. There are things like the life insurance companies know based off of your labs and your lifestyle within a few months when they expect you to die, right? And some of those things you can control, right? And then focus on those and start taking some action on some of that. And like your VO2 max, right? Your watch your glucose spikes and all that stuff. So a lot of actionable, important stuff that you can do on the wellness front. Like you said before, to not prevent, but to influence. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and that's true, right? And the reality is that you look at all those things, and to Peter's point, right? I mean, there's so much of this, but once again, you're fighting a system that isn't designed, right? When a person is spending on average about $1,500 a month for health care for their family, and medical insurance for their family. I don't know where it ever went from health insurance to things, because it was always called medical insurance when I first started. But the reality is when you're spending that much money, and in theory, it doesn't really cover other than, I'll call it a reduced rate of, some services, which really are what I call a check-in points. They're really not prevention. I mean, it's really about, okay, is my cholesterol higher than it was last year or not? And is it still below the concerning mark? Well, okay, it is. Great. Okay, great. See you next year. That's not our health, right? But the reality is when we're spending so much money for that and various different things, how much money does one have left over to do the things that ultimately are going to impact those checkups, if you will, from a science standpoint over the course of the year, whether for, again, activity, nutrition. Now, granted, it doesn't all have to be super expensive. Some things one can do that's free, but there's still some cost to, fruits and vegetables and various different things and stuff like that. I mean, we can, again, go down lots of rabbit holes to the point. And so I think as we look at this, it comes back to, every of the books, like Peter's books and all the other stuff. There's actually one, I think it was called the Longevity Project. And they actually followed these group of people, and it was since early on. I mean, for decades, they followed them, right? And I'll have to look up that book specifically again, because it's been many years since I read it. But it's interesting to show the studies they got out of the data they got out of it. But, the bottom line, it wasn't just also, once again, one particular thing that says, okay, well, this person, a blue zone is another great example, right? If you've probably read that book or seen the documentary, and there's more or less not just about what we eat or physical exercise, but it's also how we think, right? How we manage things. What is our circle of influences? Are they positive? Are they negative? For some people, is there a spiritual component, a faith component in it? And do I have those things in my life, right? So the reality is, it's just, there's so many things that contribute towards it. And I think, in my opinion, the industry has done a disservice in trying to ram particular things down people's throats or mindsets, and not really approaching and saying, listen, pick what you want based on your interests, your availabilities, or your abilities, and do something, versus, hey, you got to look like this, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. It's like, start with something, and then from there go upon and build upon those things. But it is a very interesting, I'll put it this way, topic in which, everybody has their thought processes behind it, for sure.
Oh, yes, for sure. Well, there's maybe we'll have to talk again and dive into some more of these different aspects. Great stuff. I like to ask people a reflection question sometimes. Like, what do you wish you knew sooner about building wealth and success and health earlier in your career?
That's a great question. I would say I wish I was a little less naive, in the sense that I thought people were more interested in their own well-being than what they actually are.
Okay.
Really? Because I really thought to myself, again, my contrast of seeing pain and suffering, right, going through those things and thinking to myself, and my own, again, reflection of going, I don't want to go through that, so what can I do? And yeah, that was a close example, but we see examples all day long out there, right, that people have said, hey, you're not healthy. And so I guess I'm just surprised by how such a positive thing is so difficult to achieve or to get engaged with.
Okay. Yeah, I've run across that myself. For our viewers, Jason, you've frozen up. But your audio is still good. So let's wrap things up still here.
I'm
It's
praising
funny.
You guys as we speak. Yes.
It's funny, right? Because I've seen this in different forms. It was a study. People are much more likely to have their dog finish their entire medical regimen if they have been a prescription or something, whereas they won't complete their own. Right? They're much more likely to take care of somebody else and treat somebody else more or better than they would themselves.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? I mean, you think to yourself, how does that possibly? And of course, again, I would flip it the other direction, saying, well, isn't your dog or pet better off if you're doing better? Right? I mean, right? The better you do, the better the pet and the surrounding people should do. But I guess that's not the mindset. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I scratch my head a lot in this industry, put it that way.
For anybody who would like to connect with you or learn more, what should they do, Jason?
Best way, you can get kind of a whole bunch of information at our corporate website, which is lifecoregroup.com, or our specific consumer website, which is myhealthaviator.com. I believe on both of them, you can actually download a complimentary healthcare guide that kind of helps you just navigate or look at the perspective of healthcare insurance differently, right? It's our philosophies, our thought processes, those things. And that is complimentary to anybody that goes online and just submits their name and their email address to us.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for listening and watching. Thank you very much, Jason Paul, for joining me today. We appreciate you sharing your story and insights into success and health here in Phoenix.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for the time. It's great.
All right. Thank you.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.